Brilliant. Great, we are live. Welcome to episode 9 of my new podcast, Generative AI and I. As a quick introduction, generative AI has been compared to this iPhone moment, one that has disrupted the way we communicate and it's brought in historical technology change with new business models and new applications. Now, this podcast is intended to help you understand how Gen AI will impact the future of tech from the leaders in the space, what the market landscape looks like, new applications and use cases that it would spawn, and the risks and hurdles it will have to tackle. So, this isn't a space where there are a lot of experts. Everyone is on their own learning journey, and the ones that stay ahead are the ones who are curious. So, in this podcast, we will talk to the builders, the doers, and the leaders with one goal to help you understand and stay ahead in this new machine generated, created new world. Please note all the opinions expressed here are personal. So, with that, without much further ado, I'm going to jump into today's episode and welcome our guest, Stephen. Stephen Harris is one of my former bosses and a person I really look up to. A Harvard Business School graduate, Stephen brings in 27 years of professional experience. He has a track record of achieving success across data, analytics, and AI. He has led global data teams as a chief data and analytics officer, a corporate VP across Microsoft, has had stints in Meta and VMware, and so on. He brings a broad and deep set of strategic and tactical approaches built from his experiences with highly competitive multinational Fortune 100, 500, and 1,000 corporations. He's been with management consulting across tech and public sectors. He's also reported in directly to the CFO, which means that he's been able to highlight how the analytics and opportunities translate into operational cost savings and also tied back to the company level strategic goals. So there's no other person who could be better than talking about how to drive business outcomes with Gen AI from an exec view. So welcome to this episode, Stephen. So honored to have you on board.
Thank you so much, Rajani. I'm excited to be here and excited to participate. Like you said, we all are on our learning journey when it comes to Gen AI. So this is great.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So, as I started off, you've been one of the leaders I've immensely admired, Stefan, from the perspective of how you bring together the depth of understanding of tech and tying it to the business context and translating it into business impact. And you've used the term AI Sherpa. I think I've seen that referenced a couple of times when referring to how leaders should organize and bring in adoption with AI. Could you elaborate on your role that you think leaders should play in driving adoption and responsible use of generative AI?
Yeah, I think certainly when I sort of step back and think about the power of what AI can deliver, and how organizations from the boardroom to the back office need to really think about adopting, curating, ensuring that there's integrity in how the technology is being used, not just looking at the power of what the tech can do to deliver value for a customer, for a partner, for employees, but the responsible use of it, as you mentioned, right? Because we are all somewhat on as early stages of a learning journey. There are some that have crossed the chasm already. They are making full application and use of Gen AI, and they've embedded it into their core products. I think as a technologist, as a business leader, as an executive, as an individual, we all have a responsibility to think thoroughly about the application of this particular capability that's being brought to life. Specifically, when I think about a Sherpa, I think about one who is sort of the guide, right? That's going to take us on this journey. And as as corporations, as businesses, as leaders, as government leaders start to really think about the adoption, I think there needs to be someone who is accountable not only for the implementation of the technology, the design of it, but the governance of it as well. So laying out sort of the roadmap that allows people to understand both architecturally as well as when it comes to the various use cases. Here's how we are unifying our alignment around the adoption and the use of the technology, whether it be embedded in as part of a core product that companies are developing, or capability that's extended so that it touches the universe in many different ways, whether it be customers, partners, or employees. At the end of the day, I think the ability to be able to explain the technology and the capability to the user audiences to ensure that they are using the technology in the right way, but more importantly, that the technology is performing in the way that it was intended to perform. And so, in order to do that, you really have to have guardrails around understanding the adoption and the use. You have to be able to measure the business impact and state it. You also have to be able to control for what I call out of bound kind of activities, right? When you design a product, you design that product for a specific purpose or an intended use. There's always going to be bad actors on the platform, right? And so thinking about the various scenarios that control and manage the risk for those bad actors, and having what I would just call catch-alls to be able to at least identify when you have something that is creating a pattern that sort of veers you off course from the intended use of the technology or the capability that is being deployed using Gen AI. And so while you can't design for every bad actor use case, designing for the ones that put in controls for your specific business are key. And so bringing in those communities like, legal and risk that can help you think through those scenarios, I think are important. And so having more representation at the table rather than less is key. But I do think just being intentional about the investment, the focus, the prioritization, not trying to, deliver everything to everyone, but identify those priorities that help move the agenda of the business forward, that are measurable, that are risk controlled, and that serve your respective audiences in the way that you intend, I think is the right approach. And being able to explain that from the boardroom to the back office again, I think sets you up to be successful in this space. And that's really kind of the role of what the Sherpa can help do. Drive that articulation, work with technologists, ensure that customer focus is there, and then bringing in that community of risk averse players that can help you really manage the course of what you're deploying for your organization.
Brilliant. I remember reading this HBR article, Stefan, which talks about how one of the key roles in any analytics team is that of a translator, to be able to translate what you're building into a business outcome. You kind of extend that further by calling out the need for a Sherpa. You talk about driving measurable business impact, and more importantly, how do you identify or prepare to fail, right? Like the tackling the bad actors, as you put it. And I also love the phrase convincing from boardroom to back office. I think I'm going to borrow that. Uh,
Absolutely.
Kind of related to this question, right? You something I've personally wondered as well. You've led analytics team across organization as a chief data officer, and a lot of your role, I would assume, means communicating back to the extended leadership around the value that analytics brings in. So how do you see this inflection point with Gen AI change the way you look at driving business impact, like from a talent perspective to setting up infra required for us to drive this value? So there's a lot of change you have to do both upwards and downwards when it comes to talent as well as setting the teams up for success. So how do you think about this?
Yeah, so building on what we just talked about in terms of being able to tell the story, right? Effective communication in AI storytelling. We used to call it data storytelling, right? Because when you're in a particular domain, whether it be finance or marketing or engineering, you have or data, you have your respective speak, right? Your lingo, your language. That language is not always translatable to the enterprise or to users, to your customers, in fact. And so when you think about launching a new technology or a new capability, around Gen AI, you should also think about how do we tell the story of this capability in the most simplistic terms so that whoever the audience is that's hearing it understands exactly what the power or the capability is intended to deliver. Now, not in all cases, right? Will this scenario make sense? For example, we all are very much used to sort of the automated tele help and assistance, which sometimes can be very frustrating for us, right? When we just want to get through the prompts and we want to get to our resolution, especially when you're trying to change a flight and you just want it to happen quickly, right? And it's like, well, tell me more about what you want to do. Like, I don't want to tell you more. I know exactly what I want. And so designing smart and intelligent capability that allows the layperson or the advanced individual to be able to navigate their way through your capability is really important. And how you tell that story and how you bring that to life, I think requires additional thought, right? It's like I think about the days of when ERP systems were going live. The very last thing that implementation teams thought about was training, right? Training dollars were always the dollars that were shut off or abandoned, if you will, because they needed more time to get the technology and the business processes aligned correctly. Well, in this scenario, I think you need to be thinking about how you deliver and how it's consumed first, because it will give you a lot of intel in terms of whether the scenarios and the use cases that you're selecting are really a priority, right? Because if you can craft the message around them fairly quickly, even if they're super complex in terms of how they are administered, service, and are enabling a particular business process or capability, your ability to be able to describe that and land that message and test that message, right, with the various stakeholders, I think is key. And that becomes a winning proposition across the organization for everyone, for the team players, for those that are building the actual tech, for the product in and of itself, for the consuming environments. So the more input that you gain as you build the momentum around the use cases that you're going to deploy becomes important. When you think about infrastructure, right, there are many ways to take full advantage of rapidly accelerating the stand up and deployment of infrastructure. Having these bots that are, build up, consistently upon existing becomes a winning story for investment, right? When you want to, take investment dollars forward or proposal for investment dollars forward, being able to describe how the technology is going to accelerate, landing new capability is key. When you think about the journey of a professional in this space, I think there are a lot of questions that are being raised, right? And I think organizations are really struggling to think through, how do we tell the story? I saw a quote from an executive, and I'm losing the exec's name at the moment, but they were asked a question around, very directly, will AI start to replace, current jobs? And the executive said, absolutely. But here's what we're intending to do. We're actually not just intending to lay off people. We are going to reskill, upskill, and deploy those resources in a very different way that allows us to take full advantage of the technology, but utilize the talent that we have on board, because they also bring value. They have a ton of understanding around how the company works. And at the end of the day, technology doesn't entirely in itself supersede human capability to think, right? And so remembering that a human in the loop in every technology scenario is necessary, whether it be from the maintenance to the innovation that comes after, or managing the deployment of how it's performing in operation. And so that human in the loop will play a key role. And having that knowledge of how the business works today, not just taking technology and mirroring the business process, but really thinking through the design of that to say, did we have the most optimized process from the get-go? And can this technology reduce some of that process down to fewer steps that allow us to accelerate how we touch customers, accelerate how we engage with our communities, accelerate how we apply and provide employee services? Whatever the scenarios may be, I think it's important that, again, taking the time to think through how this lands with the audiences, building that message around the capability, and articulating how the technology should perform, and being able to measure that start to finish becomes key part of how you architect and how you solve and deploy these business cases or use cases, if you will, leveraging Gen AI.
You love that end-to-end view, right? You spoke about a bunch of things over there, which is good to kind of unpack. But I'm going to double down on the talent piece,
Yeah,
Stefan, right? Specifically on, like, I'm sure you get this question a lot. One of the questions I hear a lot is, oh, exactly like you said, is this going to replace us? How do I stay relevant? And I agree with your perspective that it is going to automate tasks and not jobs, and thereby freeing up time for you to do other more value-added things.
that's right.
Uh, I think there was recently, not recently, probably a couple of months now. Time moves really fast in this Gen AI world. There's the new code interpreter, and it does visualization, descriptive analytics, pattern
Yep,
identification, the whole gamut of things that you would expect a data scientist to do.
that's
And it
right.
also summarized it into an exec-friendly manner, right? So, what would you recommend for folks in the space, like data scientists, to look at in terms of skill sets, and how do they continue to stay relevant?
I think the core skill sets that we as, data professionals, data scientists in this space develop are key, and we should double down on making sure that we are experts in the domain and in the space. Because again, at the end of the day, when when a technology goes rogue, you need to understand and be able to signal that it's actually going rogue and performing outside of its boundaries, right? But more importantly, you need to be able to validate and verify how that design works specifically in the use cases for your organization, for your enterprise. And I will tell you that any out of the box capability is probably not going to serve you in a way that will deliver, for your specific business use cases. It may give you a jump start. It may give you a capability to advance, testing scenarios, right, where you're trying to prove out a particular use case. But data is very specific to an organization, right? And so when you join that data up with the algorithm or the capability or the models that are being run by these bots, if you will, whether it be code that's generating the outcomes from a visualization perspective, from a summarization perspective, there needs to be a checker. There needs to be someone who can validate that that code is actually performing in the way that it should be. And that's where we come in, right? And so while it may give us a jump start, that just means we need to spend more time in testing and in validation and in curating those scenarios, those business use cases that we're actually leveraging the capability to deliver for us. And so we don't necessarily gain more time. We just shift where we apply the focus, right? And I think that's super important for us to remember. So as data scientists, building out the capability, building out your resident skill sets, I think should remain the same. I think you should never back away from a particular area of learning. You should always remain super curious, and you should always be able to challenge, right? Just like we create challenger models. When we deploy a model, we want to challenge whether that model is actually performing in the way that it should, where we throw data at it. We need to do the exact same thing with these capabilities that are being launched, that are accelerators for us, right? An accelerator is only as good as our ability to adopt and control it. And so as long as we remain sharp and end to end, I think it's fine. But at the end of the day, my advice is double down on being curious and understanding how things work, because at the end of the day, I guarantee you'll come out with a a full list of things where you will say, well, yes, it gives us this starter capability. Here's what it does not do. And this is where the team's going to focus, right? And so just remember, it doesn't take away, and this is really, really important to be able to communicate, right? Because executives will hear, oh, well, can't you get this done in 2 weeks instead of 10, because now that you're using all these accelerators? No, what it does is it allows us to now look at more use cases in a shorter period of time. The validation of those, the controls, the testing of it is where we're doubling down to ensure that we've got the right stuff in place before we go launching something into production, which could harm the business. And so it's just a matter of where we're spending the time. We don't actually gain more, per se, if you will.
Yeah, that's a really good disclaimer to add, right? And I also like your point around how to leverage working with AI, complement with in a complementary manner, and use that as a coach to kind of stay ahead. And the term accelerator, it indeed doesn't replace but accelerates your work.
You
So
know,
you
I'll just
spoke about. Mhm.
I'll just make
Sure.
one more comment. I think this is a great opportunity
Mhm.
for those new members that are coming on the team to,
Mm,
they're super curious, right? Maybe they're just graduated
mm,
from school and they're landing on the team. Allow
mhm,
them the time to just test and learn, right?
mm,
Come back and
mm,
give the feedback on how the technology works. It's a
mm,
great way to embed and include those individuals into the course of business, giving them
mm,
real world scenarios to go test and learn with the new technology, and then bring that learning along into the organization, right? Because your teams are going to be flooded with responsibility, and what a better way to be able to introduce new technology and new team members into a corporate environment where you need to move fast, potentially not break things, but land the opportunity to drive adoption of this new capability. And so that's just a thing that I offer up because it'll help accelerate some of that learning and the learning
mm.
journey for the organization and for the team members.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Um, just another question on the talent piece. We spoke about folks who are probably mid-career, early in their career.
Mhm.
Do you have any recommendations for those who are leaders in this space, right? What would you
I think,
recommend for people? Mhm.
yeah, great question, Ranjani. I think one of the things that's really, really important for leaders to remember that is to encourage your team members to be curious, right? Give them the time and the space to be able to learn while they actually fulfill their respective, duties and requirements. I don't think it is I don't think there is any pass that anyone should get for meeting timelines, right? Because, like my boss would always say, Charlotte would say, if you have a list of objectives and they don't have a date attached to them when you're going to deliver, then it's just a list, right? And so anything that you've put in a plan must have a date, right? And so I think leaders need to think through how they are architecting their respective development plans for their team members and creating that as a mechanism to be able to measure those individuals who will go above and beyond, but also, setting targets for the team to say 10%, 20%, 50%, or 100% of my team will have acquire this knowledge, skill set, and capability by this date, right? And what it does is it really plants the flag in terms of encouraging learning, development, and growth of individuals on your team across all disciplines. And so that helps the project management team, that helps the architect, that helps the data engineer, that helps the data scientist, and it helps the entire analytic community, because now all of a sudden you've unlocked a door that allows everyone to jump in and start that learning journey irrespective. And so that's how the culture starts to turn over, right? When leaders set the agenda and say, hey guys, we've been thinking about this as a leadership team. We want to create a goal, establish a plan around that, and unlock the ability for our team members all up to be able to jump in on this and create a learning journey. And that's going to unlock opportunity for individuals to grow, to excel, to take on new roles within the organization. And that's part of that self-responsibility as a leader, that you need to open the doors for learning, but also individuals have to jump on board and see that opportunity and run with it as well. And so it's a joint thing, but the leader has to start first, right, and create that. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Absolutely. I think we spoke a lot about like the business value. We spoke about talent. I do want to, conclude it with the theme around where do you see this space, Gen AI, going and the challenges, right? So, what are the areas in Gen AI that you find the most fascinating, and where do you see the most value accruing in the future?
It's a really interesting topic to try to unpack. Let me see if I can do this justice. I think certainly because there are so many unknowns, the fear of what AI can do has been stirred, again, from the boardroom to the back office. But I think we need to move away from fear and really in, jump all the way in, right? In terms of how we are thinking about this capability. When I think about AI, what I find fascinating is the technology's ability to be multidimensional and multifaceted as a capability all in one, right? And so the ability to have chat, but auto summarization, code creation, right? I mean, like end to end, it basically becomes this super technologist, right? If you will, all in one. The fear in that is context, right? How much context that is relevant to my particular business or my particular use case actually is embedded in the technology's ability to splice all these pieces, pull them together, and land a message, a capability, or turn something on for an organization. And so I think as fast as the technology is moving, we need to also quickly get our understanding, but not necessarily fear the technology or feel like we need to be ahead of the technology in every scenario, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to think about, from the portfolio of options that the capabilities are providing, right? From an AI, a Gen AI perspective, what are the things that are most relevant for accelerating our business? Where do we think we can get the greatest use and application, where we can manage the risk and we can bring the talent along and serve the customer, in a much more effective manner, and then measure that value and be able to state it, to executives, to the board, to the street, and to our respective in-house communities. And so, it's just like anything where you go to a buffet and you're like, wow, this is the most amazing seafood buffet that I've ever seen in my life. And it has every type of seafood, combining every, ethnicity of how the seafood may be curated or cooked, but you may not have an appetite for all of it. It's great that you have the options. Let's choose the things that are going to be most fulfilling for you, right? And so I think we need to think about the technology also in that way. There's a buffet of options. Not all of them will be options that will be right for us. We may dabble and try, test and learn, and we may decide that we love it, it fits, let's run. Or we may say, that's interesting, not quite for my palate. Others may enjoy it, but it's good to see that there's been thoughtfulness in providing a buffet of options so that we can draw down from those and run. And I think as long as we think about it in that way and we frame it that way for our respective organizations, it gives us the freedom to actually consume at will, not too much, right? Because we don't want to bloat ourselves when it comes to being able to manage that technology and to control the risks and the risk scenarios around it. But we do appreciate the options that become available to us and the power that the technology can provide. Did I answer all of that? Or I think there may have been a piece that I may maybe not have addressed, but that's how I'm kind of thinking about the framing of it all.
No, I think that's a good point, right? I think there's a lot of FOMO that everyone needs to do everything. And you're right, not everyone, every organization needs to be across the stack, for example. And I think McKinsey calls it like the golden use cases, identifying what are those use cases that is relevant for you, and then bringing in your data to customize it, using the proprietary data to customize it for your purposes, right?
That's
So
right.
I completely agree with you on that one. Maybe the flip side of the same question, Stefan, is talk about value, and I think that's true, right? It's not just a hype. But what are the imminent challenges you see as organizations seek to adopt and keep up with this exponential change?
I think there are several challenges, but let me just sort of kind of focus in on what I think are the key challenges that organizations are thinking about. First is just around what does this mean for us? The ability to articulate how this technology will serve our business, our team members in a way that matters most and can deliver business value and a set of business outcomes that make sense for us. And so building out that common understanding, being able to articulate that story, I think is a big challenge. On the flip side of that, I think understanding how to manage the risks. How do you govern the technology as it scales, right? Because the power of what this technology delivers just continues to grow the more you serve it data, if you will, right? And use cases. And so how you expand and build upon that while being able to think through the governance structure to ensure that you have the explainability, you can measure the value, you can control for the risks, and you can, accelerate continuous, innovation, whether it be on the product side or optimizing the business. The ability to architect that on top of or in addition to existing infra becomes a challenge for organizations, right? And so as you introduce new technology, my recommendation is always to start with a governing architecture, right? How does this fit into the landscape of what we have today, where we potentially have gaps, and can unify our mindset around closing that gap, and then all jump on board to accelerate the deployment and delivery of it. So that architecture becomes the governing framework, if you will, for all capability that comes forward leveraging Gen AI. And I think lastly, how do we control for those scenarios when technology goes rogue? And so while you may not be able to articulate all of the use cases, I think certainly highlighting those high priority use cases for things that keep you off of the front page of the Wall Street Journal for negative press or social media for that matter, right? Because when things don't operate the way customers want them to, they go straight to social media, right? And so, being able to spot those and serve those customers using the technology in the same way, right? And so when you design for a capability, design for its inverse operation so that you can actually stop it using itself, if you will, right? To govern itself. And so thinking through that, both from an architectural standpoint to the use cases that you deploy them, how you control and manage, technology that goes rogue, because at the end of the day, you want the experience of both the business that has, that is leveraging it, whether it be marketing, sales, support, engineering, to the end customer and their experience around that, knowing what that journey looks like, being able to articulate that journey, and then knowing where you have abnormalities because the technology is not performing in the way that it should, whether it be from a performance perspective or how it is touching the end user, become the scenarios that I think you need to manage for in both the architect, the design, and the deployment of the capability. And so those are challenges that I think every organization will face, irrespective of who you are in this space, a technology company or a products, and services company, all of those scenarios will apply when it comes to, thinking through, hey, these are the challenges that we must face. Let's make sure that we've got the right players at the table and that we're designing it best practice. We're thinking it through, and then we can leverage the we can leverage the goodness of it, if you will, the
Yeah.
best set of outcomes as intended.
Yeah, no, those are really relevant points. And for example, the one you spoke about, not just throwing another set of things to do, but rather fitting it within the existing architecture. How does it fit in, right? So that you don't create tech debt downstream and have this spaghetti of architecture that you need to further unravel, right? I think that's such an important point. And then also building for governance. How do you tackle customer data? How do you ensure there's encryption? How do you ensure there's no violation of privacy? So I think all of the relevant points.
One,
Um,
one last
and
point that I would, sorry,
yeah,
Rajani,
sure.
one last point that I'll make is that because you spawned a thought in me when you talked about tech debt, I think
Mhm.
certainly the opportunity to um, uh, uh, gain proof points of the technology's ability to perform, and then do a look back, right? To say, where do we have opportunity to now sunset existing business processes and
Mhm.
technology so that we can continue to use that as an invest vehicle for more goodness, right? When it comes to leveraging Gen I. But I also think it's really, really important to remember that not every scenario is designed for AI to serve it, and keeping that at the forefront of your mind by having that architectural checklist, having
Mhm.
that set of use cases that are validated, and specifically asking the question, is this technology, right? Is Gen AI the best way to serve this particular set of outcomes? And if the answer becomes yes, after you've checked the boxes, then accelerate and move forward. But never forget that scenario that you called out around tech debt, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have a bunch of bots and inability to demonstrate that you can sunset other capability that may just be, resident. I think the last thing I'll say is AI unlocks the door for getting your data landscape cleaned up. And so this is an opportunity if you've been, as a data executive or data leader, been trying to get your customer data in order, been trying to get your, engineering data in order. This is an opportunity to say, listen, these use cases require us to do this cleanup work. And so, if we want this to serve our audiences in the right way, we need to invest in ensuring that our data landscape has the integrity around it end to end. And so, curating that, to serve the use cases may be the steps that one might want to propose to take, because you might not be able to get it all. But if you can curate it around those use cases, then at least you can start to clean up your landscape in a way that makes most sense, right? So that you're not waiting for the landscape to be fully cleaned while you test and learn and figure out the deployment of Gen AI use cases and scenarios for your organization. But use it as an opportunity and build it into the plan. That's the way to get it done.
Yeah. I love how across all of your conversations, it's always like problem first and tech second, right? And then look at, okay, is this tech required to solve this problem in a unique manner? Um, we definitely chatted about a lot of things, Stefan, but before I
Yes.
let you go, I do want to hear your concluding thoughts, right? How do you see Gen AI evolving in the future? What excites you the most about its potential impact on society? Or is there anything else you would like to share as concluding thoughts for our audience today?
I think Gen AI is going to be a major accelerator in terms of learning, right? I think the thing that we have to guard for, protect for, is ensuring that we don't remove critical thinking from the process of human nature, relying solely on technology to do the critical thinking for us. I think critical thinking is a skill set that we all must constantly challenge ourselves to actively um, uh, uh, do daily, right? Because in that, it gives us, um, that sound reasoning uh, from how we think about, strategically we should leverage technology, all the way down to the architectural components of how it comes together, back up through, you know, envisioning how it serves our audiences. What I find most fascinating about the technology is the breadth of how it can serve us, both from an organization perspective, but also from a personal perspective. I mean, literally, you basically on your phone can have the Gen AI capability running everything from your calendar to your workouts to your habits, and then learning your own personal learning journey, right? Where you're interacting with a chatbot and asking it to gather and synthesize information for you. But the critical thinking piece needs to also come into play when it serves you back that set of results. Your ability to lean in on what the technology has served you, using that skill of critical thinking to say, is this correct? Does it make sense? Is it relevant? And has it gathered non-relevant information and served it back to me? And has it brought anything new to my understanding? And so, like, being able to just sort of process that, I think, is key. And so you can't just let go and let the technology. You have to lean in on the results that it produces, and that critical thinking skill, I think, is key. And so it's fascinating that it can do all of these things, but I think we just need to remain curious and also lean in on our critical thinking as we move forward in its adoption.
Absolutely. People tend to think of zero or one, right? Either I'll not
Right.
use it at all or I'll expect it to do everything. I think the truth
Exactly.
lies somewhere in between. So, absolutely. Great way to close the session today, Stefan. I think we've covered a lot of ground in the 45 minutes that we did have this. Thanks a lot for sharing your views. It's definitely eye-opening for me as a leader as well in terms of thinking about how execs look at the space. Thank you for your time today. Great having you on the show.
Likewise. Thanks so much. Take care.